Okay, we are live. Welcome in, everybody, to The Slate. We are a DraftKings program. We'll take you up until just about 6 o'clock, getting started just before 5:30 Eastern Time. Brendan Glasheen with Gary and Thorne, middle of your screen. Matt LaMarca to the right. Gentlemen, happy Valentine's Day if you celebrate.
Thanks,
you
Glash.
as well, Glash.
Yeah.
Have a lovely day.
For the DFS betting community, we can all be each other's Valentines and be together and for this next half hour. So we're still unpacking thoughts from Super Bowl 57. Can take a little gander at next year because that's what we do. We're like, all right, what's next? What's coming up next? And we'll look at the NBA. Kind of a weird spot in the NBA, right? Because the All-Star break's coming up. Like, do people is it? We're at the they think thank you, LeBron, for giving everyone a week off as of a couple years ago now. But it's now turned into like 12 days off for a lot of teams because they're like, you know what, just take the extra time. Take the especially for the guys that are going to play in the game in Salt Lake City this weekend. So we'll throw you a softball each to start us off here. LaMarca, we'll go to you first. Just final lasting thoughts from the other night and anything that's on your mind you'd like to get off your chest here from the Super Bowl.
I think my biggest takeaway is just put some respect on Andy Reid's name and Eric Bieniemy's name. I still don't understand why that guy hasn't gotten a head coaching job, but their play calling, the fact that they were able to exploit this goal line flaw that the Eagles had where they were bringing receivers in motion, and you saw them score 2 uncontested touchdowns using that same motion. Like, that's the type of stuff that I think that Andy Reid and this Chiefs offense does better than just about anybody. They took full advantage of the extra time, and it was a good game. I thought it was a tough way to end it with a holding call, but at the same time, it's hard to argue that the Chiefs weren't the better team. So while it wasn't the ending I think we were all hoping for, I don't necessarily feel like the wrong team won.
Yeah. You can go right down the list too from earlier in the game. And look, these are all thoughts I know people have talked about now the last couple of days, but Miles Sanders catch and fumble or incomplete pass, right? That's a break for Philadelphia. They got a break that went their way.
I think that was an incomplete pass. I think it was
pretty clearly an incomplete pass in my eyes.
But you could go back and look and maybe, hey, in week 5, when those two teams played, they could have called that. They didn't call it.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just picking it apart, right? And then you got the Goddard catch that I thought was not a catch, and they called it a catch. And there's Devontae Smith had a play that was under review for a long time. And typically, in any sport, the longer the review goes, it probably means the ruling on the field is going to stand, and there's not enough evidence to turn it over. Again, things that most people already know at this point. And to your point about Bieniemy, I guess, and it's not fair to him. I'm with you, LaMarca. Like, him and Andy Reid are holding play sheets, right? So how much credit does it really go all to Reid? Of course, the quarterback gets a lot of the credit too, but does the OC get overlooked in his situation because he's got those two guys? And
100%. Look at some of the guys who have gotten jobs based off of being the offensive coordinator for amazing quarterbacks.
Philadelphia is a great example, right?
Well, sure, but even more specifically, we've been talking so much about the Broncos situation. Nathaniel Hackett continues to get jobs based almost primarily off the fact that he was
anyone who's had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay in their lifetime gets a job.
Yeah, you start looking around. Adam Gase coasted for 6.5 years on the fact that he got to coach Peyton Manning one time. There's a lot of guys who've done a lot less than Eric Bieniemy and have gotten their opportunity to shine. And I can understand that some people still look with skepticism and go, how much of this is actually Andy Reid? How much of this is actually Patrick Mahomes? But my goodness, he has cleared every single qualification that you could have to get a head coaching job. So the fact he continues to not is stupefying.
My biggest takeaway from the game is schedule matters. And I don't want to get Philadelphia in trouble because you play the schedule you play. And I guess what I fear is for the next half decade, if Philly can keep most of its nucleus together, just using Philly as an example, we're going to have the same. If just looking at the state of the conference, we're going to have the same discussion then for the next 5 years about the NFC. If we're going to get on Philadelphia for their strength of schedule, well, who's to say if Derek Carr, we'll get to Derek Carr. Derek Carr is available. Say Derek Carr goes to Carolina. Okay.
Shifting the balance of power.
Derek Carr goes to New Orleans. Well, I mean, you could make a very fair case that whatever team Derek Carr goes to the NFC South. Well, whatever team lands Derek Carr, probably, or I'm not saying they should be, but they could emerge as favorites to win their division next year.
If it's the NFC South specifically, I would agree with you.
Yes.
I mean, look, we've talked about this all season long. Like, when you start looking at futures bets, I think it's reflected in this as well. Like, all the good young quarterbacks are in the AFC.
Yep.
I mean, maybe there's a chance that we get, aside from Jalen Hurts, obviously, and people feel a bunch of different ways about Dak. Dak's a top 10 quarterback. But you start looking at, maybe Lamar Jackson. I know there's been some Atlanta buzz coming out the last couple of weeks. Like, that could be
There's zero chance he's leaving Baltimore.
I agree, but I'm just like,
I mean, Lamarca, $100 million apart is a pretty glaring
But
headline.
the thing is, the franchise tag exists, and the Ravens are not letting him walk out the door for nothing.
But it really just seems like Patrick Mahomes is going to be in Kansas City probably for most of his career, if not all of his career. And I think you're looking at other guys like Herbert's in a similar spot with the Chargers. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is probably getting to that territory if he has one more good season with the Jaguars. Like, Josh Allen's probably going to be a forever Buffalo Bill. Like, there are quarterback
Zach Wilson.
Yeah, and Zach Wilson, obviously, just a staple in New York. At least I hope so. But, they're the next 10 years of the AFC. We already know the names that are going to be dominating in the AFC. There's a lot more openness in the NFC. So, yeah, it's like, even if we start looking at futures, like, you take a look at Chargers 22-1. I think Jacksonville's like 28-1. Like, there's a lot more like fun.
Detroit, don't forget your team.
No, we don't have to talk about that. But there's a lot more fun, like, kind of projecting some of these mid-tier long shots in the AFC, just because you can start dreaming about the quarterback, where you can't really do that in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, look at just how short these numbers are. You just compare the conference odds, right? You can look at 7 teams inside plus 2,000, whereas you come down here, it's just way more. It's just way more even as it pertains to the AFC. Like, and we even saw that coming down the stretch in December. Like, we didn't know who would have the 1 seed. I mean, you got your blue bloods, like your KCs, Buffaloes, and Bengals. But like you just said, Gary, and you could make legitimate cases. And I know you were just talking about Super Bowl, but you can make cases for these teams here.
Can someone explain to me why the Jets are up there?
I think it's just the perception they're going to get a quarterback, right?
That's the Aaron Rodgers angle, right? Possibly.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, I guess.
The darkness.
I hate it. I think that's
too. Dark Knight, Gotham. Oh, it would be great. He comes flying out of a bat cave with the Jets uniform on. I mean, come on, Lamar.
Can I make a long shot pick in the NFC?
No, you can't. Yes, please.
Give me the Chicago Bears. I don't know if they necessarily can win the conference, but I pretty firmly believe that they are not going to be the second worst team in the NFC, which is what they're priced at right now.
Yeah.
I think if there is a candidate to make a Jalen Hurts type of leap, it's Justin Fields, right? I mean, he made strides down the stretch with his legs. If they can get him another weapon or two, I think that could possibly help the development with his arm. You add in a premium draft pick, right? Not even necessarily the number 1 pick. They might end up trading down, get a premium draft pick, and they have $100 million in cap space. They are first in cap space right now with just under 100 million. Atlanta is second at 56 million. And obviously teams can open up cap space. They can restructure contracts, etc. Like, these numbers aren't like the end all be all, but the Bears have a ton of flexibility right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if, unlike a lot of these teams, they at least have somebody at quarterback who could be the guy. So I'm very intrigued by the Bears at a, massive long shot number. I don't necessarily think they can win the conference. I think that would be a pretty big leap. But if they get into the playoffs, that opens up all sorts of, potential hedge opportunities. So I'm grabbing this number now.
Makes sense. And the sexy pick in that division, right? Because do we expect the Minnesota Vikings to win 11 one-score games next year? Regression's probably coming their way. Everyone loves the Lions at plus 1100, right? They had a good year, riding some momentum. That defense, though, is a real problem. Now, the Bears did trade off some of their really good defensive pieces as they kind of figured out they weren't going to be.
I mean, they traded away an outside linebacker or an inside linebacker that doesn't rush the passer. Like, I thought that the Roquan Smith trade was very good for them.
Yes.
I'm less enthused about trading the number 32 overall pick for Chase Claypool, but I thought that the Roquan Smith move was actually very good for them.
No, I tend to agree. You have to get someone, either a high-end corner or a high-end pass rusher, and if you just got a name recognition helps, but you don't want to be spending money on your cap to an outside linebacker who is not going to make impact. Now, that's a nice piece if it's a complementary piece to a championship team. You can say, okay, we can add this guy for pennies on the dollar into our mix. That's one thing, right? Like, not a great, I mean, because Ndamukong Suh is really good. But when the Eagles grab Suh, you're like, okay, that makes sense. They're adding to what they've already got. But in the Bears' case, they need to get those primary pieces, both sides of the ball, to make any sense. So I like it.
I feel like they're like probably the leading candidate on who's going to spend $80 million this offseason to improve the offensive line.
They're going Jacksonville style. You know, like we saw it work. We saw it work 2 years ago for the Patriots. We saw it work last year for the Jaguars. Now, is it a good long-term scenario? Like, not really. You're not going to build a great team by splashing a lot of cash in free agency.
Well, it could. But to your point, it could if the quarterback's any good. If the quarterback takes the lead, then it looks
great
smart.
For a 1 year turnaround, specifically. So I would love to see them bring in a marquee receiver and then just really load up on defense. I think that this team could turn around very, very quickly.
What would the cost be for, say, DeAndre Hopkins to go to Chicago? Like, I'm just thinking of a name that's out there.
Yeah. Arizona would probably want at least one first-round pick. And obviously the Bears would not be willing to trade a number 1 overall first-round pick.
You can't get the Texans deal where you give up, what was it, a second and James Conner from that in 2020?
David Johnson.
Yeah. Oh, David Johnson. What did I say? James Conner. Yeah, David Johnson. Yes.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to cost a little bit more than that.
Bill O'Brien.
Although he's also in a weird spot. Like, he's got a little distressed asset to him where he wants out. So at a certain point, if he's just going to hold out and not play, I mean, you have to trade him. You might not even get what you want from him if you're Arizona. And also, they literally just hired a new head coach today. It really seems like maybe aside from Kyler, this could be one of those seasons where, and Kyler's even not going to play, or he might not even play at all next season. This could really just be one of those years where they're like, let's clean house. Let's try to go get that number 1 overall pick in 2024. And yeah, maybe they don't even get a first rounder for DeAndre just because everyone knows that he's not long for there much longer.
But you guys see my point though. I mean, like Darian just talked about that. It's a big. I mean, it's not this year coming up, but it's really important for the NFC to figure it out with quarterback and get.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think the AFC is in the best position to draft the young quarterbacks, right?
Houston, I know.
The Colts, they're kind of the teams that are really in the driver's seat to get Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. So if there is another star quarterback that might be entering the league, they could find themselves in the AFC as well. So, and
it can come back to Tom Brady. It's like Tom Brady was so bad in his final year that the Panthers and the Falcons had decent-ish, for their standards, decent-ish seasons. So 7-10 doesn't put you inside the top 5. My point is Atlanta and Carolina are at the bottom of the top 10 as opposed to at the top of the league because the division was so bad that they actually did okay.
Isn't it kind of crazy though? Like I know the Pro Bowl means absolutely nothing anymore. Like this is just one of those weird observations, but we've spent 20 minutes talking about the power dynamic of quarterback in the AFC and just how crazy it is, the list of names, the guys who play quarterback in the AFC. And Tyler Huntley made the AFC Pro Bowl team for quarterback this year.
Yeah, that's weird.
That is bizarre.
Yeah, but I mean, LaMarca, good call. I mean, maybe the Bears do go fine. I mean, but see, the problem is, and I admit it, I'll be the first one. Like when the Christian Kirk deal came out with Jackson, I'm like, whoa, like really? Now does Jacoby Myers get, because Jacoby Myers is the highest graded wide receiver available on the market.
Look, I think they're going to
and
spend on
money-
offensive line first and foremost. Like, I mean, heck, we just saw the Chiefs' offensive line. I don't want to say win them a Super Bowl, but that was an amazing performance by that offensive line and both tackles. I mean, I'm sure the Chiefs are going to try to keep one of Orlando Brown Jr. and Wiley, but with that, they've got some big money contracts already in the books. Like maybe one of those guys heads to Chicago. Like I just think they're going to throw a lot of money at their offensive line. And then who knows what happens with the draft pick situation? Like probably they'll get a first this year and like another future first or something like that, depending on who's trading with them. But maybe they also get a second back or something like that. Like they could still have 2 or 3 top 50 picks to use to improve their receiving core, or their offensive line, or whatever. But yeah, I like this. I think to Matt's overall point, like this is going to be an entirely different team heading into next season. And if Justin Fields takes even like half the leap that we saw Jalen Hurts take, they're going to be really good.
The last game, I heard this today, the last game the Bears won was at New England, Monday Night Football. That was the last game they won in the season. And that that was where you're like, oh, and then of course Fields got hurt.
I wrote about like rebuilding the Chicago Bears, earlier this offseason. And like for a team
the offseason just started.
I guess it was technically during the playoffs.
I'm giving you a hard time.
During their offseason.
Yes.
Yes. No, but they pulled off the near impossible feat, which is finishing with the worst record in the league and yet somehow instilling like promise and hope into their fan base.
It's true. Like they're the rare team that's going to end up with the number 1 pick. It's just so rare that we've seen teams trade out of this spot in recent past, because quarterback needy teams are generally so dead set on tanking that they end up with the first pick. Like it is an odd situation. I can't remember the last time we were sitting here going, okay, there's a team sitting with the first pick, but they have their quarterback situation figured out.
Are the Cardinals just so abysmal on defense that we don't believe that they're worth a look at 100-1?
Well, again, Kyler's probably not going to play, right? Like
the injury to the Murray, the quarterback, doesn't help. Yes.
No, I don't think he's. I don't think he's necessarily even going to miss the start of the year.
Really, I thought it was kind of up in the air whether or not he'd be back in time to play.
Yeah, well, even if he starts the year missing a couple of games, it's certainly not like he's
expected to miss. This was this was right before February. Ian Rappaport expected to miss the start of the season.
Okay,
which we don't know what that means, right? That could
I just feel like if you're the Cardinals,
does seem pretty steep, but especially because they kind of fit a similar dynamic to the Bears, where they also potentially have a quarterback. But I don't know. Chicago just feels better to me. It's one of those half like spider sense tingling things.
I do wonder what their division odds are going to be, because if they're like plus 600, plus 700, that's something you should definitely jump on too.
I just think the thing to keep in mind, if we're going to be fair, if we're going to give the Eagles, or at least a lot of people that picked against the Eagles in the Super Bowl, well, look who they played, look at their schedule. Well, we're going to be playing that game then in the NFC for the next couple of years, at least until these teams figure out quarterback. So that's going to be something to monitor once we get to next year's playoffs. I'm just looking now. The Bears get the NFC South at home this year. They play the Falcons and Panthers at home. They get the Cardinals at home on their schedule. In their road trips, they go to the Bucks, to the Chargers, to the Commanders, and to Cleveland. So they got some. The schedule's pretty nice too.
All aboard!
Yeah, but I think again though, to Glash's point, like you could probably run through most NFC schedules and go,
yes,
like, hey, that's not too bad.
I know, and that's why I'm trying to be fair to the Eagles. It's like my point is, Eagles, it's not just you. I think this would have happened to any other team.
Look, it was just a talking point. Like again, we have 2 weeks.
If San Francisco reached the Super Bowl, they'd look at it and go, well, yeah, you got the Purdy angle if he was healthy. But even then, you look at it and go, wait a minute, they got their butt kicked by Kansas City just earlier in the year. Like it wasn't even a close game.
like it was kind of a perfect storm though. Like we talked about the fact that the Eagles, like this was, let's go back to like preseason like betting podcasts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
People were all over the Eagles because
To
you
win the
could look at a
division.
schedule and go, they've got a really easy schedule this year. And then it just so happens that they don't have to face Dak one of the times they play the Cowboys. It just so happens that when they reach the NFC Championship game, we're talking about maybe Christian McCaffrey having to play emergency quarterback. Like they had some pretty crazy breaks, specifically in the games that were like the games where you were going into it going, all right, here's the time they get the challenge. And it's like, oh, no, not this
And
time.
The other Cowboys game, they didn't have their quarterback.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So,
arguably the two hardest games they had during the regular season, one of the two teams was missing a quarterback.
Right. Well, and I think one of the best games of the year, as far if you look, if the Eagles won the title and you had your championship DVD. I mean, week 1 against the Lions became a game. I mean, like Lions were down, and you're like, oh no, that Philly defense. And then of course they feasted on lackluster competition down the stretch, and it's hard to get someone in trouble for what their schedule is. So I'm fascinated by that. Now I'm like. Now, fascinated is one word. The other one, I'm kind of worried. I'm like, oh man, the NFC really stinks, especially if Rodgers is out of the conference, Brady's out. We'll see with Stafford and the Rams if they can figure it out. I mean, their draft capital stinks, as we know. They're kind of in some trouble. And like I said about the Vikings, I think, Gary, and to your point, you talk preseason betting discussion, preseason betting pod. So the Carolinas, even Atlanta to a degree, the Bears, the Lions to maybe just win the division, like going into next year, right? Say even Rodgers stays, you'd probably prefer that as a Bears or Lions backer to get a better number, right? Yeah. Like you could look at it and you could get a really nice, juicy number on the Lions.
I mean, I still think they'll have a good number even if Rodgers leaves, honestly. I mean, this could all change though, depending on to Matt's first point, like maybe jump on this now if you want to jump on it. I know there aren't division odds yet, but if they are the highest spending team in free agency, if they come out of the first 2 days of the draft and everyone's going like, oh, the Bears just, they use their draft assets perfectly. Like what a draft so far. Like that number is going to start to move. And then if Rodgers happens to be not in Green Bay, then suddenly you've got the snowball effect going and they're this year's Lions. But right now, yeah, I think that's a pretty nice bet. Like, and again, to Matt's overall point, again, you're not expecting to win this bet, but it will have equity if they do end up making the playoffs.
Yep. And the thing with long shots is like any sort of line movement, it means you're going to lose a ton of value. Like when this number drops, it's not going to drop from plus 800 to or plus 8,000 to plus 7,950. You know, it's going to drop to plus 6,000, right? Like you got to be early, I think.
Yeah. So I think there's a real opportunity from a future standpoint with the NFC. I think that's what we learned. At least it's one of the, like, hindsight's 2020. Like you're like, oh, like that would have made a lot of sense had I thought of that. And again, it relies on coaching and quarterback development. And I think the league needs it. Like, you know who wants it? Like Fox Sports needs it because they carry all the NFC games. Like,
I mean, but again, this could change.
Al Michaels needs it.
The NFC football just in general changes so fast, right? Like we thought the AFC West was going to be the greatest division we'd ever seen in our lives this year. Yeah. And it turned out the Chiefs actually also had a really easy schedule because they got to play the Raiders and the Broncos twice. I mean, maybe Trey Lance stays healthy next season and is amazing. Maybe Kyler Murray is healthy and actually looks like Kyler Murray again. Like these things can change quickly, but right now, yeah, the NFC is definitely more open in the mid tier than the AFC.
We'll go to we're running out of time. We'll go to the NBA. You guys got a few spots you want to look at in the NBA tonight? LaMarca?
Gary, and tell me why I shouldn't grab these 7 points with the Orlando Magic tonight.
I'm with you
against your Raptors.
I'm in lockstep. It's one of my favorite bets of the night.
I mean, the Magic have just played incredibly well recently. I get that traveling to Toronto is not an easy trip, but I just don't see why they should be getting 7 points. Like that kind of says that's the type of line you would expect to see when you have a good Eastern Conference playoff team against a bottom feeder. And I don't think that either of those teams fit that description at this point. Like I don't see a lot separating these two teams, honestly.
No, I agree. And we just got word Gary Trent Jr. has been ruled out. Precious Achiuwa is in. So the Raptors get half of their guys who are questionable for this game. Cole Anthony is not going to play in this one. He was questionable as well. But yeah, look, this is a weird game, and this line just seems strange. The Magic have won each of their last 2 meetings with the Raptors. Toronto does have the rest advantage in this game, but they are only 1-4 the last 5 games they've played with the rest advantage. The Magic coming in on the second night of a back-to-back. And yeah, they are Orlando's 24-10 ATS their last 34 games. They just cover. They cover almost better than anyone else in the league. This line's just too big. It's way too big considering, again, the Raptors just beat the Pistons by a point and then blew like a 14-point fourth quarter lead to the Jazz. Like, they're not a good team. So 7 points is way too big a number.
Boston has a bunch of guys out tonight against the Bucks. The Clippers Warriors game. How much is there any new? I mean, I know Curry's still out for Golden State.
Clay's going to play, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Well, the Warriors, I know folks, this is a very, square angle, but I know the Warriors have been horrible on the road, as we know.
What has Giannis moved to in the MVP market?
Oh, we're going to go to the future market. It's the big future show here. Awards. There we go. Giannis plus 750.
Don't hate that. He's playing incredibly well. His usage rate, I looked this up today for DFS purposes, but his usage rate over the last 10 games is north of 42%. He's just absolutely dominating on the interior. The Bucks have ripped off 10 straight wins. If they win tonight against the undermanned Celtics as 9-point favorites,
Giannis is in, right? Giannis is in tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was probable.
They officially ruled him in.
Okay, perfect. If they win today, they're a half game behind the Celtics in the standings. Yep. So, like, the 1 seed in the East is wide open, and as great as Jokic has been, right? Like, we still have a quarter of the season left, even a little bit more than a quarter of the season left. Like, I just don't want to lay the type of number that you have to lay here with the favorite, minus 170. That's pretty aggressive to me. So I think plus 750 is a decent little number here for Giannis.
I think that also plays into Jokic, right? Like, I guess the way to argue against Jokic is not to say
I don't know if there's going to be this sort of like the boredom that we sometimes talk about with that's what I figured coming into the year. Like, there's no way he could do anything and he wouldn't win 3 straight MVPs, but there's a lot of groundswell still for just how amazing Nikola Jokic is. Obviously it's no fun betting the favorite at minus 170
for sure. I'm just saying, like, he could turn an ankle.
Sure. Yeah.
The Nuggets could start losing a bunch of games.
Well,
right?
I was just going to say too, theoretically, not to say that these teams will catch them and not that his numbers will drop off, but what if all the talent that got moved to the West and these teams like your Dallas, your Phoenix, if the Clippers can get rolling, that could diminish what he's doing. I think
the Nuggets are, I don't want to say they're locked into the 1 seed, but they've got a lot of cushion on the 1 seed right now.
5 games. Yeah.
And so again, I'm not saying them getting the 1 seed is going to win him MVP, but if you're basing your argument on maybe they end up in like the 4 spot or the 5 spot, I really do think they're going to be the number 1 seed. Embiid could be interesting though. I mean, just in the sense of like, one, he's always down to have just gaudy stat lines. We know the Philadelphia media is always ready to point out when they think Joel Embiid is being disrespected.
Yeah.
As is Joel Embiid.
Yes, as is Joel Embiid.
We already heard that with the quarterback in Philadelphia too for 2 weeks. So
there you go.
More than 2 weeks, the whole season, for crying out loud.
But
anyway, continue.
Embiid and the Sixers, by strength of schedule, they actually have the easiest remaining schedule in the NBA. So if we do want to get behind like a narrative, sort of like there was that little bit of Tatum groundswell at the end of last year, just because the Celtics had suddenly reeled off like some crazy amount of wins in like a 38 game span. Maybe the Sixers finish 21-5 and suddenly there's this just narrative going that this is it. Embiid's finally done enough to win the MVP. I think Giannis has the better number, and I agree with Matt. Like, just with the way things are trending currently, the Bucks seem to just be picking up steam. But I think Embiid, if they can just have a crazy like second half, quote unquote, of the season out of the All-Star break, and the schedule really dictates they might.
Well, I was just going to add before we get out of here, like the next stretch of games here for Philadelphia, because they've lost to they haven't beat Boston yet. They did beat Milwaukee early in the year, but you go Cleveland, Memphis, Boston, all at home starting. You play Cleveland tomorrow, Memphis, and then so you play Cleveland, go to the break. This is what they have out of the break: Memphis home, Boston home, home and home with Miami, at Dallas, at Milwaukee, and you've got a couple of big spots there.
Tough
ABC, TNT. I mean, there's your window. If Embiid's
And then
gonna
every other game is like against the Pacers, basically.
yeah, so that's a big window if Embiid's going to gain some ground. Okay, we need to go. Gentlemen, that was good. It was a good show. Good stuff. We packed a lot in there into a half hour. So have a great Valentine's Day. Rest of your Valentine's Day. Thank you all. Odds, of course, presented by the DraftKings Sportsbook. There's the information you need should you need it. Thanks to Matt behind the scenes as well as Eamon. For Matt LaMarca and Gary and Thorne, Brendan Glasheen, this was The Slate. The Sweat airs at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. That's where you can get the latest from us at DraftKings.